All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm Andy Naja-Riese, the CEO of the Agricultural Institute of Marin, or AIM, and thank you for joining us at the Marin Farmers Market, as well as for our Harvest Talk, focused on what consumers should know about carbon farming. What should consumers know about carbon farming? We're hopeful by the end of the talk, carbon farming will be a household term, and you're going to go home tonight and talk about it at your dinner tables, because we as consumers do have the ability to impact the climate through the food and wool fiber choices that we make. So I'm on the steering committee of the Marin Carbon Project, and Marin Carbon Project, or MCP, is a collaboration between ranchers, scientists, practitioners, nonprofits, working together to advance practical, science-based farming practices to build healthy soils, strengthen climate resilience, and support healthy local food systems. And the Marin Carbon Project is one of the 3 endorsed solutions by the Marin Climate Action Network, or MarinCan. We have some folks from MarinCan today, designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we have the Marin Carbon Project, the Marin Biomass Study, and AIM Center for Food and Agriculture, representing the future of climate resilient local agricultural systems. So carbon farming is a scientifically backed strategy to address climate change by transforming agriculture from a carbon source into a carbon sink through practices that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it in the soil. So when you're supporting producers that use carbon farming at the farmers market, you're actually helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, help farmers and ranchers to reinvest in practices that will help to draw down more carbon emissions into the soil, and to help support healthy, resilient local and regional food systems. We hope that when you leave today, you understand the role that you can play as a consumer by your own food choices at the farmers market or other places where you shop, about how you can support carbon farming efforts. We are so lucky to have this amazing panel with us today. The group of folks here today are all representing some of the co-founders, or are the co-founders of the Marin Carbon Project, through their work, through their organizations, and we're so glad that all of you can join us today. We have Joseph Button. Joseph is the Vice President of Sustainability and Strategic Impact at Straus Family Creamery. Hey, Joseph. Hey, what's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Cookie dough.
Cookie dough, all right. All right, Dr. Jeffrey Creque, who's the Director of Rangeland and Agroecosystem Management at the Carbon Cycle Institute and a co-founder of the Marin Carbon Project. Hey, Jeff, how's it going?
Good morning.
You were coming from the compost site earlier today?
I was out in the cashew.
Oh, great.
Compost.
Great, thank you for joining us. Then we have Lynette Niebrugge, I should have asked in advance, who's the Director of Education and Training at the Carbon Cycle Institute and also a founding member of the Marin Carbon Project. Hi, Lynette.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's fantastic.
Glad you could be here today. You look great with the hat and the shades.
Thanks.
And then last but certainly not least, we have Sarah Skinker, who is the Carbon Farming Program Manager at the Marin Resource Conservation District. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great. So we have some wonderful questions for all of our panelists today, and we hope that after the panel, you'll also stick around to shop the farmers market. 3 of the original farmers, or 3 of the farmers and ranchers that had the original carbon farming plans, are all represented here at our farmers market today. So we have Straus Family Creamery, Stemple Creek Ranch, as well as Gilardi's Family Farm, that were 3 of some of the original farms that had carbon farming plans. There's also other farmers here today, like Full Belly Farm, that also has carbon farming practices in Yolo County. So we're going to kick things off, and our first question is for Jeff. Hold on one second. So, Jeff, for people hearing the term carbon farming, what is it and why does it matter?
Yeah. So I often say that all farming is carbon farming because all of agriculture is totally dependent on the capacity of vegetation, crops, to pull solar energy from the sun through the process of photosynthesis. The distinction between sort of what we now call carbon farming as a phenomenon, regular old agriculture, is that carbon farming attempts to make sure that the net flow of carbon is from the atmosphere to the farm system, as opposed to the opposite, which is so indicative of our modern agricultural economy, which sees a flow of carbon from our soils back to the atmosphere. And so, very correctly, ag has been tagged with a very negative view in terms of climate change. But that is not necessary. And in fact, a different model of farming, which we're promoting through the carbon farming process and has come to be known largely as regenerative agriculture, depends on the ability of that producer to increase the rate and the quantity of carbon drawn down from the atmosphere through the process of photosynthesis and ultimately transformed into the products of agriculture and soil fertility. I want to share a phrase with you I came across the other day because it's been rolling around in my head and I don't know how to get rid of it except by showing it. And that is regenerative economies of peace. I find that a very compelling concept to carry around. And I think that if we're serious about addressing the climate catastrophe that we're all facing, we have to engage our working lands as opportunities to draw down upwards of a third of that excess CO2 in the atmosphere, which has been put there by our mismanagement of working landscapes. But the opportunity is there, and carbon farming is the avenue we're pursuing in order to make that a reality.
Thanks, Jeff. So Lynette, following on to that, how can farms and ranches store more carbon in their working landscapes?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for that background information. It feeds off of what I'm going to say. But one of the ways that a lot of these farms out here in West Marin and Sonoma and throughout the state can really focus on drawing down more carbon is one method is what we do here is create carbon farm plans, which essentially is a roadmap for producers to understand how we can start planning around our ecosystems, our functions, and the whole farm itself, how everything works together. So essentially what we're talking about is we plan around organizing around carbon and carbon sequestration. So looking around here, like Jeff said, drawing down carbon through plants into our soil, we can sequester more carbon. And what does that look like on the ground? That could be the implementation of, we can call them carbon farming practices, we could call them conservation practices, or just simply saying, we can start thinking about managing our systems differently by implementing these practices, which are implementing hedgerows, changing the management of our livestock integration into our systems, really being intentional about plantings, restoring our watershed, enhancing our riparian corridors. All of these simple methods are a way for us to increase soil organic matter, which is also increasing our carbon sequestration into our soils, which in return also offers us many, many co-benefits of like biological diversity and thinking about increased soil water holding capacity, infiltration, decreasing drought on our specific working landscapes. So as you're thinking about just the planning process and what Jeff was saying, we can actually think about this all the way from the farmers actually doing the work on the ground, all the way to producing our product, whether it's food or fiber, and then how we're actually consuming that as a consumer and how we're buying our products and thinking about where we're buying our products and what that means to us. So essentially, as we're thinking about storing more carbon, that is also benefiting us in many other ways.
Great, thanks, Lynette. And Joseph, let's unpack this a bit more. So Straus Creamery is a local organic enterprise. You support 12 small family farms operating dairies. Tell us more about, from a practical standpoint, what does it mean when the dairies implement carbon farm plans? What types of practices are they using?
Sure, and Andy, thanks. When Andy said, I hope you talk about this at your dinner table tonight, I hope you do. This is my absolute favorite topic. I've been on the carbon farm planning journey for 10 years, which is just the amount of time that I've been working at Straus. And on one of the first days I was there, somebody landed a thick piece of paper in front of me. It was Albert Strauss's carbon farm plan. And they said, figure this out and help us implement it. And there was a name on it, Dr. Jeff Creque. And that was the start of my journey. I think what we realized was carbon farm plans were an amazing management practice to help organic dairy farmers think more deeply about how they're implementing their organic systems plan. Think more deeply about how they can maximize the value of their forage production. Think more deeply about how they can not just mitigate climate change, but prepare and adapt to a changing climate. And at the same time, help meet consumer expectations for our brand. And so we started this journey and we said, let's help all of our other producers also adopt carbon farm plan. And so the first thing I had to do is I had to understand what this meant for producers. And really at the end of the day for dairy farms, what I realized is they are stock full of carbon, thanks to our friend manure. And so I leaned on the resources around me and I said, what can we do and how can we do this? And so really, it begins with thoughtful planning. And I brought show and tell today because I'm so proud of it. This is my carbon farm planning binder. This has 11 carbon farm plans in it from all of our producers. And it represents probably hundreds of hours of technical scientific work to understand how each of the farms in our region that supply Straus Family Creamery can maximize the amount of positive carbon that they're putting through their system to help support their farms. So practically, what does that mean? Practically, it really means using the resources you have to maximize your carbon benefit. And that starts with managing manure, creating compost, applying that back to the land in an appropriate manner, advancing the amount of grass species that you're planting in your pastures, biodiverse plantings, advancing the amount of riparian zones that we're protecting through plantings, establishing hedgerows and windbreaks. All of these practices benefit the farms. But I had to show them why it benefited them. And so one of the very first things I did is I said, let's look at Albert Straus's farm where he applied compost for the very first time in pasture 15 and see what happened before and after. So we looked at satellite imagery. We saw a stark difference, the 10 years prior to the compost application and the 5 years after. He grew more feed in a drought, maximizing his amount of feed that he had on farm for cows, eliminating the amount of feed that he needed to buy off them. Very simple data point. And we said, at the minimum, this equals $100 per acre per year of avoided outside feed, at minimum. And guess what? That piqued the interest of dairy farmers. They said, hey, let's look into this. So we talked about some of those practices, but really it's a management philosophy. A management philosophy of how can I take what I'm doing today and think about it more thoughtfully so I can really build my soil. I can see my soil as a resource. I can see my manure not as a risk, but as a pivotal asset to build soil health. And then get to work with great technical experts to implement those plans and do it thoughtfully and well-intentioned.
Thanks, Joseph. So that's a good transition to Sarah. So tell us, what is the demand among farmers and ranchers for carbon farm plans, and what type of technical and financial support does the Resource Conservation provide to implement those plans?
Yeah, great question. So right now there are 27 carbon farm plans in Marin County. And we currently have about 12 farmers on our wait list to receive a carbon farm plan. And so once farmers apply and we receive funding to implement to write them, they go through our select process, and if they're selected, we put together a team of experts like folks at this table, other stakeholders and experts in water systems and creek restoration, to first kind of understand what's going on the landscape. So that might look like soil testing, looking at the water systems and the infrastructure like fencing, and kind of doing a survey of the management practices that the farmers are already implementing on their farms. And then we put that all together and develop with our team a set of recommendations that might include anything from subdividing pastures to kind of strategize around rotational grazing, adding water infrastructure, applying compost strategically, as Joseph was speaking of, in different phases on different parts of the farm, cover cropping, ranging all the way through multi-phase, multi-year riparian restoration projects, which involve planting native species that sequester carbon, stabilize soil, and improve soil water holding capacity. So there's a really wide range of practices, and you can imagine, like Joseph mentioned, this takes up to several years to develop these plans. So it's a really long-term, comprehensive practice where we're on site working with farmers to understand what they're already doing and what can be done in the future. And we also pair that with, how they can implement these plans, right? So it's one thing to have this beautiful roadmap full of these really colorful maps that identify all these practices, but how does that get done and how long does that take? And how is that funded? Because some of these practices are expensive and involve a lot of applications and paperwork, and farmers already have a lot of that on their shoulders. So we try to minimize that burden as well. And so part of that is connecting that to funding opportunities, whether that's through us at the RCD or the California Department of Food and Ag or the Federal Natural Resource Conservation Service. So a lot of opportunities for producers to apply for funding and to implement these practices, and we support them through every step of the way, even after the plan is completed. And there's also a lot of demand through us to apply to implement those practices. So we've got a couple of grants coming up that folks can apply for compost application and fencing. So I'm going to be working with these folks to identify farmers that are excited about that and want to prioritize practices. So exciting stuff coming up. I'll also add that the RCD receives a lot of funding, state, local, federal, to implement these practices. But one of our biggest funding sources is through Marin County Measure A, which is a quarter-cent sales tax that you're supporting by shopping at this market. And that goes directly to funding on-the-ground practices that we're talking about today. So just wanted to plug that as well, and that's a huge part of our work, and none of this could happen without it. So lots of demand, and we're excited to see what comes in the future.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And you can see there's so much collaboration that occurs. There's no one organization doing carbon farming. It requires this incredible network. So let's go back to Joseph. There's many environmental and economic benefits from carbon farming plans. Tell us, how long does it take for dairies to experience those benefits?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I've got a fantastic answer. It depends. It depends. It depends on the practice. It depends on the season. It depends if we're in a drought or a period of heavy rain. But let's just get real practical. Straus is paying our producers to develop these plans and implement them. So, on a basic level, they're getting paid every month for doing this work, because we see it as so important, not just for the health of the milk, but also for the health of their businesses in the long run. So we see that as a strategic effort. If you're thinking about something like compost application, I think if you apply compost in the fall on a dairy pasture, you will see benefits in the next grass season, so in the spring, let's say 6 months. And what benefits are you going to see? Your grass is going to be healthier because your soil is healthier and your nutrient uptake is better into the forage. The cows are going to eat that grass. That grass is going to have more proteins, and that protein is actually what we pay the farmers for. If they have higher protein levels in their milk, they get more on their milk check. So within 6 months, they're seeing benefits from compost application. And if you start linking all these different practices together, and we hit a drought, which we will again, right? Their forage production in a drought is going to be more resilient than their neighboring farms who haven't been doing this, because the soil water retention is going to be higher, and they're going to grow more grass, which is going to benefit their economics. So I've had some farmers come to me and said, hey, I put compost on. I didn't notice any difference between last year and this year. It feels all the same. And I said, the last 2 years we had really healthy rainfall. Wait for our next drought year, which is what we observed at Albert Straus's farm. In a drought year, you're going to have almost the same amount of forage production in these pastures if you've been regularly implementing compost application as your neighbors who aren't. So the economic benefits show up, but it depends when they do show up. And at Straus, we feel it's important to help grease the wheel. Here's a little incentive to encourage you to do these things that are going to benefit you in the long run.
And we were so impressed by Straus's model that last year at our Gather for the Planet event, the 12 participating dairies received our Climate Action Champion Award. So congratulations for all of your accomplishments.
We're very proud of our supplying dairies. And I should say, all of you who buy Straus products, you're participating in this. So with the revenues we receive from the sale of our products, we're giving our farmers, on average, in the first 3 years of our dairy sustainability program, $250,000 a year of incentives for doing this work. So it's really meaningful, the partnership from consumer all the way back to farm.
Joseph. So let's go back to Jeff this way and then talk about the scientific impact. So Jeff, how do you know that carbon farming is actually working, and how do you measure the impact?
That's a good and complicated question. I think Joseph has outlined some of the ways that we measure impact in productivity and forage quality, and maybe farmer satisfaction too. There are, however, we use some quantitative tools specifically to quantify the carbon benefits, the carbon dioxide benefits of implementing a carbon farm plan. So part of every plan is an analysis using what is known as the Comet Planner tool. This is a tool that the Marine Carbon Project co-developed with Colorado State University back in the early days, 2013 or so. I think we worked on that tool. Our question coming from the Marine Carbon Project side is there a way to easily put carbon dioxide values on these practices such as compost application, hedgerow plantings, windbreak plantings, all the various conservation practices that were going into these carbon farm plans. And the Comet team in Colorado State was really interested in this question, and they took it on, and using what is known as the DayCent model, or the daily time step model for the century model, which is an ecosystem carbon model developed back in the 1960s by Dr. Bill Parton, and it's continuing to be updated and used today. We're able to put numbers on these things. So when we apply a certain amount of compost to a certain acreage, we know that on an average annual basis, we will sequester an additional X number of tons of carbon dioxide in that environment. The same for planting, et cetera, et cetera. Periodically, then, you may want to come back in and say, take some soil samples. Hopefully you've got some baseline samples you started before the project, and then you're going to come in maybe 3 to 5 years later and take some more samples and see, am I actually making progress? But we have enough experience with these practices going all the way back to the 1930s, right? Because all of this work really started with the Dust Bowl and the emergence of the Soil Conservation Service. And so we have a huge decades, almost a century now, of experience on the ground, enough experience to know that these practices actually work. So while the question of quantification is important, and we do in fact evaluate these things quantitatively over time, we've got lots and lots and lots of real on-the-ground experience with this work. Hope that answers.
No, that was great. And I think the data is so important, what you're doing and Dr. Wendy Silver. And I think a lot of when we hear things like regenerative agriculture, sometimes there's accusations of greenwashing, but I think there's a strong scientific basis here to demonstrate the impact of this work. So thank you, Jeff, for all of what you do. And then let's go back to Sarah. So are there broader impacts from carbon farming to our local food and fiber systems? And are there benefits to rural communities?
So many benefits and so many impacts, as you're hearing about, but I want to focus on climate resilience as a whole. So for example, practices that we're talking about today, like compost application and revegetating creeks and things like that, hedgerow plantings, paired with good management strategies, can have really major impacts on a farm's ability to adapt to a changing climate. And so, we're seeing not only the impact on those farms, but, we're talking about individual farms a lot here in this context, but they're all connected, right? Streams and watersheds are all connected. There's riparian corridors. It's hard to look at farms in such an individual context, because what they're implementing on their farm has an impact on what's going on downstream. Erosion and sedimentation and creating habitat and forage for wildlife. That all has impacts on their neighbors and, 3, 4, 5, 6 farms away, right? So at the RCD, we like to think about kind of a network of carbon farm plans. And the farming community and ranching community is already so tight knit. So word travels fast, and we really try to kind of leverage that to talk about folks' abilities to adapt to climate change and create more resilient landscapes that have an impact on the wildlife and water quality and the community. And so by having more climate resilient farms in West Marin, that's impacting and supporting agricultural viability in these rural communities, right? If farms are better able to adapt to climate events, like, for example, revegetating creeks can help slow and spread water, and increasing soil water holding capacity can support that effort as well. So, having less of sort of an emergency response to storm events, that can help, indirectly support these family farms stay on their ranches that they've been farming for generations. So we're kind of like connecting all the dots here, and I think there's so many impacts, but that one really is the one I want to hammer home because it's really significant, especially today.
Thank you, Sarah. So let's go back to Lynette. The Carbon Project is rooted in Marin, but tell us, is this gaining traction throughout the state or even nationally?
Yes, it is. A lot of traction, actually. So CCI was actually created from the Marin Carbon Project because everybody was looking at Marin County and what we were doing and using it as a model. So CCI was created back in 2013 to then spread the word or carbon literacy and help educate people, farmers, ranchers on carbon farming, carbon farm planning. And as a result of that, I would say that we have trained over 500 practitioners here in the state of California and outside of the state of California, and there's well over 300 carbon farm plans that have been created just here in California, and that doesn't even account for the plans that Fibershed has created for their fiber producers or Straus has created for their producers as well. I do want to say that other states that we have worked with really look at the Marin Carbon Project as guidance and as a model. We've been training folks in Wisconsin and in Texas, and they've been really looking at this model to understand how they can create something similar. I'd say Wisconsin and Texas, of all the states we've worked with, are leading. Specifically, Austin, Texas is supporting one farm there. They have a carbon farm plan, and they are making that into one of their demonstration sites to then increase awareness for other farms in their area. So I'd say that this project is very unique because everybody in the country is actually looking at this project. And so every year, every month, however long, we're still creating and building off of this. Like with the Measure A funds, people are looking at that and how they can create that in their county here in California or in their state. People are looking at the Marin Biomass Project and understanding how they can do something similar to that. So every project that the Marin Carbon Project does is leaving this county, and it's really making a bigger impact than any of us actually realize.
Great. Thanks, Lynette, for sharing that. Joseph, what role do you think that food retailers and food companies need to play in supporting carbon farming?
Yeah, that's another great question. I could probably spend 2 hours talking about it, so Anna, keep me accountable here. Look, food brands need to know their farmers. When there's a disconnection between brand and farm, this work can't get done. It's just not going to get done. So the first thing that brands can do is understand who's in their supply chain. The second thing they can do is see their supply chain and the resilience of their supply chain, aka their farmers, as vitally important for their future. And then third, make investments to make sure this happens. Okay, and that's what Straus is doing. And right now I'm speaking to like a home crowd. This is great. You guys are at the farmers market. You guys care about this stuff. There's a lot of consumers that don't have time to even think about this. They rush to the grocery store. They're buying whatever's on shelf at the cheapest price. And so there's a good opportunity for brands, especially brands that have an elevated public presence, to educate. Education on carbon farming is really hard. And it's a debate that we have at Straus all the time, and it's a really good debate to have, because I could come in and talk about all the models that Jeff was referencing earlier and drop that into Instagram, and we're gonna get 0 likes. So we need to help consumers start really light. Like, here's your farmer, number 1. 2, here's some things that they're doing. Number 3, here's why this is good for the product that you're consuming, and guess what? It's also good for the environment. So there's an education point, and that can happen through social media, that can happen through public presence. We publish a sustainability report every year. I know all of you guys read it. It's going to hit our website in the next week. But continuing that dialogue. And the other thing I do behind the scenes is I challenge other brands. So I know all the sustainability directors and vice presidents from every organic dairy brand and others, organic food brands. And I say, what are you guys doing to support your farmers and to help these practices happen? And those conversations and those dialogues, they happen. And the more that we share, and the more that we don't make it just a competitive advantage, but a shared resource to support everybody's brand, the more adoption we're gonna see. We mentioned greenwashing earlier, and that is a real risk. There are some brands out there that said, hey, in 2 years, we are gonna make 1 billion acres regenerative. And I'm like, you don't even know what you're talking about, but good job in making a big goal and talking about it. This is hard work, and it needs to be recognized as hard work. Food just doesn't pop up on a shelf. And so as brands, we need to be responsible to say, hey, there's a farmer behind this product. They're working very hard day in and day out, burning the candle at 3 ends to do something good for you and for the environment. And I think it's beholden on brands to help communicate that.
Thanks, Joseph.
Yeah.
And I think the Straus brand really benefited from when there was the viral video of the creamy milk top on maybe TikTok a couple of years ago that really helped to spread the word.
We absolutely did, and there's a strategy there. It's like, hey, guess what? Creamy milk top, this is exciting. I think there's even been a few sexy posts about that. But the next level down is, hey, we've got really great cream top milk. Wendy's over there slinging it right now if you want to get some. But, and also, learn about carbon farming.
Right.
Also sexy.
Right. So that's the theme. Carbon farming is sexy. All right. Jeff, I don't know how to follow up on that. So, Jeff, tell us, well, you mentioned before about the regenerative economy of peace. What does that mean? And how can we scale adoption of carbon farming?
Yeah, I think it's on all of us to decide what that means and make it real. I will note that that cream floating on top of the milk is this year's solar game, right? That's what that is. So there's this full example. Yeah, I think what we need to do is, and this maybe touches on what Sarah was saying about indigenous traditional ecological practice. You think about the cultures that preceded ours on this landscape, who spent thousands of years here building ecosystems that European farmers came and said, hey, wow, there's deep, rich soils and fertile lands, and look at all this wildlife running around, and let's eat it up right now and turn it into cash. And that's what we've done. And here we are, facing imminent ecological collapse. So if we understand that, we need to start looking for ways out of this trap. And I think that carbon farming is a real opportunity to begin to engage with our working lands and our own lives in a way that actually begins to rebuild those damaged ecologies, and begin to answer that question: what is a regenerative economy of peace? Because we know what a degenerative economy of war looks like. We're living through it right now. And I don't think any of us really want that or have chosen that, except a very few that are making bank off of it. So I really do feel that carbon farming, because we all eat and we all have to eat, is a path forward. It really offers us a path forward, just as a carbon farm plan offers a producer a path forward for their own engagement with their landscape to begin to regenerate that landscape and increase their bottom line through increased productivity, we can, as a society, do this at scale. And Lynette touched on that with our 500 carbon farm plans across California now and other states in the country. And in the world, there are definitely carbon farmers all over the world at this point. So, yeah, I think it's on all of us to keep that goal, front and center. How do we change the way we look at the world so that we're building and not destroying, we're adding to and not extracting? And I think collectively we could actually turn this rusty boat around and do a lot better than we're doing right now. So
Thanks, Jeff. That really gives me hope for the future. Did you want to say something, Sarah? Oh. We do have time for questions from the audience, so if anyone has a question about carbon farming, please raise your hands. Yes.
Speaking here as the father of a farmer, just wondering who she might talk with about creating a carbon plan for a farm in Mendocino. So just we can, yeah.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I can give you the contact information for the Mendocino Resource Conservation District. I'm not sure what their funding scenario is at the moment, but there's people there that can kind of walk them through what that process would look like. So, great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, and the whole panel for providing really quality information. I really appreciate that, and it's what all of you have talked about, education and information being really critical as we move forward. So Andy, I'd like to hear the role of the center that AIM is about to build, and how does it fit into spreading the word through events like this and beyond?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I really appreciate that. So I think for us, the farmers market or the Center for Food and Agriculture that we're building, we're really trying to be the connection point between West Marin and East Marin, and the connection point between rural communities and people within urban centers or elsewhere. So as we build the center, we're thinking about ways to expand market access for producers that are using carbon farming practices. So as I said, we have 3 of the original carbon farm plans. The farmers that have implemented those here at the market, like Lauren Poncha is hiding in the back from Stumble Creek Ranch. Hey, Lauren. Hey. So we think about ways to help educate buyers and consumers, because when we have more producers selling their products with carbon farm plans at the farmers market, they're not only creating access for home shoppers, we're also creating access to over 150 restaurants that source from the farmers markets for their ingredients. But one of the things as we build out the center is really about how we can help connect farmers with other types of institutions. So our local schools through farm to school programs, local institutions like childcare centers. Even San Quentin is sourcing locally as well through their jail-based cafeteria program. So we think being able to support farmers and ranchers with ways to diversify their income strategies through the centers, part of the programming that we'll offer, and also find ways to connect farmers with investment opportunities. So we have some folks here today from Food Funded with Slow Money Northern California that are working on ways to link impact investors with farms and ranches that want to adopt carbon farming practices. So we'll really be the connection point. But I also think from a practical standpoint that we know as our climate is changing that we can support more farmers and ranchers that are using climate resilient practices to help draw down carbon emissions to lessen the impact, but also we can adapt to a changing climate. And when we have the center, we'll have things like shading. So when we can do these events, people will feel more comfortable to come and learn, or programming that can be offered 7 days a week based on people's schedules. They may not be able to come. Not everyone's like us who can come here at 10 a.m. on a Thursday. So events that can occur in the evening, events that can occur with language interpretation and other types of strategies too. But I think the key point is building a center where we can continue to connect producers with people looking for nourishment. Thanks, Bill.
Go ahead, Susanna. Hold it to your right, the mic.
Hello. I was wondering, sorry, pardon my ignorance, what is greenwashing?
Who wants to answer that? You're good at calling it out, Joseph, so we'll have you do it.
Yeah, greenwashing is a negative term, and it describes how individual or business or organization might make a claim about the environment that's over-exaggerated, overemphasized, or misleading to make people think that they're doing something better than they really are. Yeah, greenwashing. And it's a tactic that many businesses have used over the years to convince consumers you should buy our product, it's superior because we've done XYZ, when in reality maybe they just made a goal and had zero implementation against it. I mentioned our sustainability report. One of the ways I avoid greenwashing for my company is I publish progress updates. So you can all come and you can look at what we've done, and if you're not happy with the progress, you can email me and say, hey, Straus needs to be doing better, you need to be doing more, but at least that information is out there. I did bring my show and tell, so this is some evidence today. But we also have a goal that by 2030, all of the farms in our network will be net carbon neutral. Spoiler alert, we may not meet it, but I'm trying the hardest I can to get there. And I'm gonna show and measure progress every year. So that is not greenwashing, but greenwashing might say, hey, we're gonna have this goal and we're not acting on it, but we're really gonna publicize it a lot.
How can you get away with it?
Yeah, we'll do 2 more questions. Okay, 3 more questions.
Hi,
Hi, Bill.
good to see you. One question that comes up very locally is we're losing a lot of dairy farms, and so what is the how do you calculate that in what you're doing? I mean, it was a loss. These people, some of them will go elsewhere and have these knowledge and techniques, but so we need to take that into account. And then I also just wanted to mention that, and so pleased to see that the Marin Carbon Project has been is alive at this group today, and today in the Point Reyes Light front page is a story that I encourage everybody to read. Tell us if, because it really reflects a lot of what you're doing, and we in the project are eager to spread the word and engage. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Great. Michael.
So this is, of course, a national and a global problem. And I'm thinking that RFK Jr., he says he supports regenerative farming. And among many conservative people, say Texas, other places, that might be seeing this as a kind of left-wing thing that will reduce farm profits and also cost consumers more money. So how do you deal with that kind of mentality in places outside of Marin, which maybe can afford more to buy these products and to support these farms?
Who wants to answer that? Joseph?
Sure. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to answer the last one either, but yes, we are losing dairy farms. And it's something I work on every day to try to reverse that trend. Carbon farm planning is one of the measures we're implementing to help reverse that, but gosh, this is a heavy issue. There are a lot of farmers implementing carbon farm plans that are not liberal, that are very conservative, and they understand the economic benefits of implementing these plans. You just need to talk to them. When I was getting my master's degree in international environmental policy, I had a professor say, you know, sometimes I think the worst thing that happened in the environmental movement was Al Gore getting involved, because it became politicized. And I'm neither here nor there for that, but let's keep federal politics out of farming. let's just support farmers to do a really good job. And in the end, it's going to support them, and it's going to support our food system, and it's going to support consumers. So I would just elevate the voices of all farmers, many of which are conservative, who are doing this work. And I think that's a good way to just expand the gospel of carbon farming. Any additional thoughts?
I think this is something that we deal with a lot at CCI. Jeff has many stories. I have many stories just working nationally. I think the most important thing I've discovered, and coming from a small farming community in the Midwest, is first of all, you just need to listen to your producer and meet them where they are. Just talk to them about their land, be on the land and be present with them at that same time, have conversations with them, speak their language, and really look at the landscape together, and then identify what is happening on their landscape, relate that to how that is decreasing their profit, decreasing their soil organic matter, and offer them solutions to how they can enhance this. And then starting there actually goes a long way. And then from there, you're building your relationship with that producer and with that community itself. And to me, that's been the most important thing I've learned about this work, is just being present and listening, and then building that trust and bond, finding the funding to help them implement, giving them the support to do this work. Because outside of the state of California, I just have to say, there is not a lot of technical service support for these producers. So oftentimes I get people in Texas emailing me to ask me questions how to manage their land, and I'm like, I'm not there. I can't help you. And so we're actually very lucky to live here and to have like these technical service providers working with producers and listening to producers. So I'd say that's kind of my answer and my experience.
Thank you so much for the in-depth info and background info of what we probably don't see on a day-to-day basis. That was super helpful. So I want to come back just to the topic and looking a little bit for a takeaway, because it said like what consumers should know about carbon farming. So we don't see the plants, we don't see the colorful binders, we just come into farmers market and stores. How are we recognizing farms and producers to do more about carbon farming? Because we all make buying decisions, some of us make investment decisions. How can we get behind the right ones? And maybe an added bonus answer would be, how do I explain it to my 8-year-old nephew why I'm making those choices without using the words sequestration and sink?
Who wants to take that?
I will say, just to answer all of those questions, I think there's a lot of opportunities to actually, for the public to actually get onto these farms, like through the Marin Agricultural Land Trust. I think they actually have some hikes at farms this weekend and through the summer. So check out their website, and you can actually have some guided tours of those farms and practices that were implemented to learn more. And bring your 8-year-old nephew, and they can actually see it for themselves. Because I think that's probably the most powerful thing, right, is to see the connection on the land. And then I'll add that, you are all active participants in this. I mentioned Measure A earlier, so there's going to be a vote to reinstate Measure A in a few years. So we're going to be doing a lot of communications to the public on that in the next couple of years. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, by participating actively in this farmers market and engaging and spreading the word, I mean, that's super powerful and can go a long way. So I'll leave it to these experts to explain how to talk about it a little bit better.
I think Lynette used the term carbon literacy earlier, and particularly given our context, which is catastrophic climate change happening right now, I think your 8-year-old nephew might be interested in what's driving climate change and what we can do about it, and understanding the carbon cycle, which is an amazingly complex and miraculous thing, and yet we're all completely embedded within it and dependent upon it. All life on Earth is dependent upon it. And so part of his education has to be that, and certainly, not ours, of course, but all the up-and-coming generations have got to understand the global context that all of this is happening within. So I think it's a great opportunity, learning opportunity, exciting. It can be approached at any level, right? From basic elementary, what is photosynthesis, all the way up to global carbon cycling processes over millennia. So I guess I'll leave you with that.
And two things I'll add is that you probably saw there were groups of school-age children here at the farmers market today. So one of the things that we do at AIM is we run a program called Digging on the Farm, where we work with local schools to bring them to the farmers market, or we go into the classroom, or we bring them out to farms. And for many children, it's their first time actually seeing a working farm. And they can go and visit farms and dairies like Bivalve Dairy to learn about carbon farming in action, or go to Windrush Farm and meet with Farmer Mimi to learn about livestock integration in a farm and learn about the link between wool fiber and carbon farming strategies. So we think that's really important, and we think that today's field trip participants will be the future farmers. We also are working on creating for consumers, so I'm looking at Melina back there, one of my colleagues. We're actually working to create a consumer badge to help consumers learn about farms and ranches that are using carbon farming practices guided by the Healthy Soils program. So we are working to identify that as a way for consumers to learn about which farms do have carbon farm plans or otherwise have healthy soil practices. So stay tuned, more to come on that as well. And then we're gonna have our final question for the panelists. So if you could leave consumers with one key takeaway about carbon farming, what would it be?
Wow. Know your farmer. I think that's maybe my advice, is know your farmer. Know where your food is coming from. It's complicated in this era, but I think we do have a unique opportunity here in Marin County to do a pretty good job of knowing where our food is coming from.
I would say, and I've mentioned this a few times, but that you are all active participants in this. Removed its you might feel from this these conversations that we're having, or not, by supporting your local farmers here at the farmers market, and just keeping your money local in Marin. You are contributing to the Measure A sales tax that we receive and other agricultural organizations in Marin receive to actually implement these practices on the ground. And so without that, a lot of this actually wouldn't happen. So we're leaning heavily on the consumer and the communities to support this work. So it's all connected, and we appreciate it.
I hope you all learned something today, and I'm going to come back to a comment I said at the beginning, is talk about it at the dinner table tonight. Slow down, talk about your food, talk about carbon farming, educate your neighbor, talk to your kids, talk to your parents, whoever it might be. You spread the word. Every once in a while I run into a Straus superfan. In fact, I don't like to wear Straus gear in public because I get accosted sometimes. And people know more about sustainability at Straus than I do, and I'm like, wow, you should have my job. But you are at the front lines of helping to spread the word. And if you need more educational tools, let us know. I can develop them. If you need a new Instagram post for your 8-year-old, let me know. It's something that we can work on. It takes a community to do this. You guys are active participants by purchasing food at the farmers market grown by folks implementing carbon farm plans. Don't underestimate the role that you play, but also lean on us to give you the tools that you need to be those ambassadors for a healthy, just, regional food system that will last into the future.
Thanks, Joseph. This is a great question, and I get really excited about this question actually, because I do teach this every day. But I think two of the things that I would like everyone to take away is, one, that every time you buy your produce or, a piece of clothing that is natural fibers, think about all that has went into the production of that one piece of clothing or food. As you hear today, just the four of us up here are just a small piece of the puzzle, and there are many of us that do background work to help to support these producers, actually get guys the quality of food that you consume and the quality of clothing that you purchase. So being conscious of that, being conscious of like where you're buying locally, who it's coming from, knowing your producer. And then other thing that I really like to leave everybody with when we're thinking about carbon farming is every single day you can just look at the sun, look at all the trees, look at all the vegetation, and think about carbon sequestration, carbon drawdown, whatever you want to think about, how you want to think about that, and think that somebody planted that tree there for a reason, for a purpose. And when you're driving along, you know, out in West Marin, and you're seeing these producers and all those trees, all those riparian corridors that are planted, that's a lot of work. And that's work that these farmers and producers do not need to do, but they are choosing to do that because they care.
All right, well, let's give a big round of applause to all of our panelists. Thank you all so much. And again, I want to thank folks for joining us today. If you want to learn more about carbon farming, visit the Marin Carbon Project website. We invite you to stay, shop the farmers market, support local carbon farmers, and help create a healthy climate. The final thing I just want to say, another way that you can help to celebrate the future of our food system is that we host our annual event at AIM called Gather for the Planet. It's on October 10th at Black Mountain Ranch, a working ranch out in West Marin, where Stemple Creek Ranch grazes their cattle using carbon farming practices. So we encourage you to join us, buy tickets at gatherfortheplanet.org. Thank you so much.